turning the world upside down. It's a phrase coined by Goldie Roger during his first meeting with his soon-to-be first mate, Rayleigh, a phrase whose meaning has been long speculated upon, but with Rox Dizabek's dialogue about Imu in chapter 1162, the concept of what the world truly means within One Piece may have just been completely recontextualized. As epic as chapter 1162 was, one of the moments that stood out for me the most was the ending, where Rox, Whitebeard, and Kaido come face to face with Imu, who has just arrived to join the chaotic battle royale of the God Valley flashback. In that stunning double-page spread, Whitebeard asks Rox who's that figure before them, referring to a certain Saint Jmu Saturn, a Saint Saturn possessed by the one and only Imu, to which Rock then responds, calling them the world, suggesting that Rox already knew about Imu on a much deeper level, perhaps as a result of their earlier encounter in chapter 1155. It was revealed back then that Rox did little more after infiltrating the flower room in the Pangaea castle once he confronted Imu. Perhaps that's where he discovered Imu's existence, realizing that he could not defeat them. But before departing, he left Imu with a warning that he would return. And now it seems that Rox may have since discovered or uncovered what Imu truly represents. Rox referring to Imu as the world in chapter 1162. This might then redefine another key moment in One Piece. Specifically in chapter 1107, back in Egghead Island arc, when Saturn asks what the Blackbeard pirates are after. To that, Van Orgo responds to declare that the Blackbeard pirates are after the world. And at the time, that line was interpreted in a much more literal sense, that Blackbeard aimed to take over and rule over the entire world. He doesn't only seek in becoming the pirate king, but he wants to be the king of the entire world. But now, after witnessing Rox's flashback, the meaning takes on a far more personal tone. It may imply that Blackbeard's goal is to take down Imu directly, either as revenge for his father Rox, or to accomplish what his father once failed to do. After all, that is also how we're first introduced to Rox. In chapter 957, Sengoku explains that Rox is this evil figure, a dangerously ambitious individual who sought to be the king of the world. A phrase that seems like it could have a completely different meaning now. And if we extend this beyond the context of the God Valley flashback and look at it on a much larger scale, how the term has been used so iconically used throughout the series, this line could define everything we've ever understood about what it means to turn the world upside down. But before we go on, please take a quick second to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, to help me turn the YouTube world upside down by helping a fellow One Piece fan get to 100,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate it. And look, here at the JoyFleet, we're just a bunch of One Piece fans who love to discuss our favorite series, and if that sounds like you, and let's face it, if you're here watching this video, then you definitely belong on this crew too. So let's go turn the YouTube world upside down together. Now getting back to Imu. If Imu really is the world, then every mention of changing the world, destroying the world, or turning the world upside down throughout the whole of One Piece could have always been referring to Imu. Not a metaphor, but literal. The so-called world everyone seeks to challenge not being an abstract concept of order or power, it's a single being, the embodiment of the system itself. When Roger first used the phrase, turn the world upside down, it wasn't just about exploration or freedom or adventure, it was about breaking a cycle of control that even he may not have fully understood at the time, but intuitively knew was wrong. As a member of the D-Clan, that instinct to oppose the world order ran in his very blood. And then when Whitebeard later spoke of someone finding the One Piece and shaking the world, that statement also carries a new meaning now. Because Whitebeard wouldn't have just been speaking hypothetically. We now know that he was a man who once stood beside Rox and explicitly heard Rox call Imu the world. Whitebeard witnessed with his very own eyes the being that ruled from the shadows. So when he said that one day someone would shake the world, he was predicting a future where that same entity, the world that Rox spoke of, would finally be confronted. Doflamingo too hinted at this truth when he said that whoever finds the treasure will upend everything. That line hits way harder now because Doflamingo isn't just any old schemer. Doffy is a former celestial dragon with knowledge of the world government's darkest secrets. He knows about the so-called national treasure hidden within Marijoa, and he knows about the Ope no Mi, the devil fruit capable of granting immortality through its ultimate surgery. The same immortality that many fans suspect is the reason why and how Imu and the Gorosei have lived for centuries. Each of them, in their own way, were echoing the same prophecy. The idea that one day someone would rise to overthrow Imu, aka the world that rules from the shadows. This could also explain why it's called the world government. It is Imu's government. And so let's take a deeper look at what Imu being the world really means. One of the first thoughts I had when we first saw Imu's powers back in chapter 1085 was that Imu may have some ability connected to space. And I know that the leading theory is or was that Imu may represent Mother Nature, i.e. Earth, due to Imu spelt backwards could be read as Umi, and Umi in Japanese means the sea. And because the Gorosei and the ancient weapons are each named after other planets within our solar system, the only one left or the only name that remains untaken is Earth, which is why fans have believed that Earth could be represented by Imu. But a while ago, I actually speculated on what if Imu actually represents the whole of the outer space, the whole of the outer world, the entire universe. And that was based on the idea that Imu often refers to themselves as Mu, and Mu in Japanese can mean void or nothingness, emptiness, which very much fits the dark aesthetic designs, the silhouette that Oda uses to depict Imu. But it also seemed to fit with what we had seen of Imu's engagement in combat against Sabo. In chapter 1085, when Sabo uses his Meta no Mi against Imu, it seems as if Imu almost devours his flames, and I thought that could make sense if you take into account Imu's ability being somehow space related, because then that would mean that Imu is almost like a perfect vacuum. There's not much that can survive in space. And in the case of Sabo's Meta no Mi, with the absence of oxygen in outer space, fire definitely cannot survive. And by extension could also explain Imu's overwhelming dominance, how Imu has lasted throughout the centuries. Imu's space abilities, Imu's nothingness, voidness, there's not many elements, there's not many species or creatures on Earth that could survive just by themselves in space. Perhaps a hint as to what's going to come next in the next chapters as to why Rox, Whitebeard, and Kaido were not able to take Imu down at God Valley. Whereas, one of the only elements that can actually survive in outer space due to its ability to withstand extreme environments and is therefore an important component in aerospace is none other than rubber. Which of course makes perfect sense that Luffy could be the natural counter to Imu as the main protagonist of our series. We've obviously seen something similar with Luffy versus Enel in Skypiea. And if Luffy as the rubber to Imu's space isn't enough, there's also the idea that Luffy as the sun god representing light is naturally opposed to Imu as the void and nothingness and the darkness. There's a great thematic playoff that Oda seems to be building up to. Luffy as the sun, filling up the emptiness and the void with his laughter, spirit, and joy. Luffy's light, reaching and transforming even the darkest or deepest voids in space. But of course, we have to note that since chapter 1085, we have seen more of Imu's abilities, and now it actually seems like Imu may be the devil incarnate. Imu's powers all seem to be devil-inspired or devil-coded, devil-themed. Imu seems like a demon, the devil themselves. But if we think about these threads, the devil and space, or even Imu representing Earth, and then if we add that alongside what we have recently learned in chapter 1162, then what if all of this is pointing to the fact that Imu is the primordial being? Imu is the world because Imu is the first being that ever existed in all the world, the earliest primordial entity that created the world. And this would almost make Imu like a god, right? A deity. In fact, I can't help but make connections back to Norse mythology. After all, we are in the Elbaf arc, which is an arc that is heavily inspired by Norse mythology. And well, in that case, it just so happens that according to Norse mythology, the primordial being is known as Ymir. Ymir is the first of the Jotun, aka giant, a powerful divine figure whom all of the cosmos, i.e. the world, was created. However, it is clearly stated within the Prose Edda, an important text that chronicles much of Norse mythology, there it's stated that Ymir was not a god. In fact, Ymir is even explicitly referred to as the devil. You see the connection? A creator being linked to the cosmos, the creation of the world, who is actually a devil and not a god. I think this perfectly encapsulates everything we've seen of Imu so far. And what is even more brilliant is that Oda could still take this a step further, because if we still do flip Imu upside down, just as Roger said, we will get, again, Umi. As we said earlier, the sea. And what does the sea represent in One Piece? Freedom. Life on the sea, life as a pirate is to be free. And I should mention that there has been some counter arguments from Japanese speakers that the whole Imu and Umi, the sea thing, doesn't actually make sense or doesn't really work because in the Japanese context, the spelling doesn't make sense. Imu, when spelled out in Japanese, if flipped backwards, would not be read as Umi. However, I would like to counter that Oda loves his wordplay, definitely loves his wordplay, and his cheeky hidden word games aren't necessarily limited to Japanese. We know that Oda often incorporates wordplay even in English. So I could still see the Imu Umi thing making sense. And then if we take this thing even one more step further, I want to point out a comment that really caught my interest during the reaction stream. Bruh makes the following comment. I wonder if the three worlds are just the three highest powers during their respective eras. And I have to say, bruh, I find this really interesting, bruh. In chapter 1138, we were introduced to the Harli, an ancient Elbathian religious text that supposedly chronicles the entire history of the world. Interestingly, the Harli is split into 3 chapters, and while there has been no confirmation yet as to how this should be interpreted, it has been widely believed or assumed within the fanbase that each of these chapters are referring to a specific period of history. The ancient history where Nika reigned, the more recent history of the Void Century, and lastly, the present or the future. And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, but remember, what are each of these chapters titled? Worlds. The first world, the second world, and the third world. Each period of history, rather than being called an era or age, is intriguingly referred to as worlds. And now, even this seems suspect. If Imu is the world, what does it mean that there are 3 worlds? Is Imu simply the first world that has surpassed the second world and has continued on to the third world? Is that why there is a demonic silhouette figure in each of the chapters? Imu as the primordial demonic being. And as Bruh said, does this mean that the strongest figure of each generation is referred to as the world? And if so, is that what Blackbeard is currently chasing? Is he trying to become the next world, the third world? Whereas Luffy wants to get rid of worlds altogether. We know that Luffy's dream is to become the Pirate King, and he knows that that requires you to be the strongest. But we also know that that's not Luffy's ultimate goal. He's not really trying to become the king of the seas or the king of the world to rule. And although what Luffy really wants is still yet a mystery, but at least it seems like now we are one step closer. And then this has me even thinking, if Imu is the world, the primordial darkness, the primordial being, the being that existed when the entire world was black, as it is in the Bible in the Genesis creation story, is that why Blackbeard sought after the Yami Yami no Mi, the void, to counter Imu's primordial void? And look, you can let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know in the comments, because this is driving me absolutely nuts, as you can tell. And I know I've only just focused on one section of chapter 1162, but don't worry, because I have more thoughts, lots and lots more thoughts, because chapter 1162 was so jam-packed, and there is a lot to discuss. So don't you fear, because although there is a One Piece break coming our way, I will fill your One Piece hole with more One Piece discussions. So please do subscribe so that you don't miss out on any One Piece discussions, especially if you want a deeper dive into chapter 1162. If you enjoyed today's discussion, you can like the video, share the video, and you can support the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you for listening to another one of my crazy One Piece ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.